University of Louisville understands that their students come from diverse backgrounds with aspirations, drives, and needs to match. With more than 50 online programs in areas like business, education, social work, engineering, and more, UofL provides students with a multitude of career advancing options and flexible coursework. Students can complete their coursework from the comfort of their home or on the go via mobile apps. Learn more at louisville.edu/online. That's louisville.edu/online.
From the University of Louisville's Delphi Center for Teaching and Learning.
And the University of Central Florida's Center for Distributed Learning.
I'm Kelvin Thompson.
And I am Tom Kavanaugh.
And you are listening to Topcast, the Teaching Online Podcast. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Kelvin. So that's what Topcast stands for. Oh, I thought it was like FedEx. It's like its own thing now. But no. It is actually an acronym of sorts.
Yeah, AAA.
AAA, yeah.
Something else, too. I forget. There's something else like that.
KFC.
Well, that's true. KFC.
That's in your backyard there.
That's very much so. That's. I think I actually said all the words the other day, and I think somebody looked at me funny. I'm old school like that. Well, back in the day, it stood for something. Yeah. So I know I have seen me sipping a beverage, but I think I've been talking to you for a few minutes, and I don't think I see you sipping anything.
No, but I have my deconstructed coffee right now, and I feel a little bad because there was some thematic coffee I could have made that I neglected to bring with me to the office to make it. So I'll have to do that at another time.
All right. Well, you want to know what I'm drinking in my vintage
I am dying
mug?
to know. Yes. What are you drinking? What's in the thermos/cup?
Yeah. Well, just a cup this afternoon, but it is a single origin Guatemala from Bean and Bean Coffee Roasters I don't think I've had any coffee sourced from New York City before, but it's sourced from New York. It is, they call it a Guatemala Anabea Meneses Yellow Catuai is the varietal from a particular farm in Guatemala. And so I thought, this high quality Guatemalan coffee might just be good for today's episode. I'm going to tell you, I wish I could share it with you because it's particularly tasty. But can you find some kind of a connection to today's episode?
This is my kind of connection, Kelvin. As you know, I like them right on the nose. Yes, I can. And in fact, that was the same kind of a thematic coffee that I was going to bring if I had just had my wits about me this morning. But yes, we're talking to a friend from Guatemala today, so it makes sense that we're having some Guatemalan Java. I appreciate that. Yep.
Well, there it is. So I guess with no further ado, I'll say that, Tom, you recently, not too long ago, interviewed our colleague Angelica Gabriela Rocha Guevara, who is Director of Educational Innovation and Technology at the Universidad del Valle de Guatemala. And Senora Rocha, or as we're going to call her, Angie, was previously a Hubert Humphrey Fellow, and she developed a relationship with UCF as a result of that program. And for those who don't know, I think this is really kind of interesting because I didn't know a whole lot until we got acquainted with Angie some years ago. The Humphrey Fellowship Program is a Fulbright exchange activity funded by the U.S. Department of State and administered by the Institute of International Education. The program aspires to build connections between U.S. and foreign leaders to advance solutions to the most pressing global challenges, such as educational access via digital teaching and learning. So, Tom, is there anything you would like to say about the interview before we cut to it?
Just that, as you said, we've gotten to know Angie over the years. Starting in 2020, she was kind of positioned at Penn State for her fellowship and was interested in online learning, and they very, nicely referred her to us, and she came to realize that there were a lot of similarities between UCF and UVG, which is how she refers to her university. So we were going to host her in person, but unfortunately this whole worldwide pandemic thing happened, and she was actually stuck in Pennsylvania. But we did a 6-week, I think, virtual fellowship with her, spent a lot of time with the staff virtually here. And then just recently, Dr. Wendy Howard and I were hosted by Angie and her team at UVG in Guatemala City. We spent a couple of days on campus and talked about partnership opportunities and some of their plans, and really enjoyed the visit, and thought that what they're doing in Guatemala would be of real interest to the Topcast listeners, because they're really trying to push the envelope there in their own context.
Well, through the modern technological marvel that is podcast time travel, here is your interview with Angie Rocha.
So Angie, thank you so much for being on Topcast.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm honored.
Yeah, well, I think that you have a lot to offer, and especially with a really kind of a different context that you work in than a lot of our listeners do, but yet there are a lot of similarities. And I thought maybe that might be a good place to start, is to just kind of maybe set the context for higher education in Guatemala, and help our listeners, our viewers, kind of better understand the kind of overarching ecosystem that you work in.
So Guatemala has a very interesting history in higher education. The first public university started in 1676. So for a long time, we had only one large public university, which was Universidad San Carlos de Guatemala. And around the mid-60s, almost 290 years after the first university was founded.
The 1960s you're talking about.
Yeah, the 1960s. Wow. So it was a long time with just one university in our country. And in the mid-60s, they finally opened and approved that private universities would start in Guatemala. So by law, we can only have one public university, which is a very large university. And then we have other private universities that have been opening their doors since 1965. So the second university was the Catholic University, Universidad Rafael Landívar. And the university where I work right now, and I'm also an alumni, is Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, which was the second private university to open its doors. And we have a very interesting history as well, because our university started because a group of parents who had founded previously the American School of Guatemala wanted a higher education model that would take, inspiration from U.S. best practices and put it into the university that they wanted to create. And they also wanted to offer majors that were not currently very popular in the other two universities. And so the first schools at UVG were all STEM related. So it was sciences, humanities, the first bachelor's degrees in math, chemistry, physics were all from UVG. So we have a very STEM-focused background. And currently at UVG, the largest school is the School of Engineering. So after UVG, other private universities started to open. And right now, the context in higher education is a lot different from the past. But we have one public university and around 15 or 16 private universities in Guatemala.
And if I recall from previous conversations, that one private university, so the country still only has one public university.
Yeah.
That one public university receives a fairly large appropriation from the government, right? In order to kind of keep the doors open and make it, I think it's free, right, for citizens?
It's almost completely free, and it does receive a lot of funding from the government. It's very large. I think it has over 200,000 students. So it's a large public university. Sometimes I wish it would like maybe become 2 or 3 universities with different areas that it specializes in. It would be more manageable than it is right now. And there can't be more because I don't know if it's because of the size of the country or because by law it was decided that just one university could be, one public university could be available in Guatemala. But now I think the size has become like an issue. And also having so many funding from the government, sometimes there's no accountability of where that funding is going. So it has its problems, but still 50% of the higher education students from Guatemala go to that public university. The other 50% of students that reach higher ed get divided between all the private universities that Guatemala has.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So let's maybe let's sort of like close the aperture a little bit and look specifically at online learning, which is kind of what our audience likes to think about and it mostly works in. I wonder if you could talk maybe kind of broadly about online learning in Guatemala and maybe specifically what you're doing at UVG. And I know that you've got kind of maybe a particular lens because you did a Humphrey Fellowship here in the U.S., both at Penn State and then kind of virtually with us here at UCF during the pandemic. And you got some exposure to kind of U.S. style online learning in higher ed. And I wonder how that compares and contrasts to what's going on in Guatemala.
Yeah, so online learning in Central America or Latin America, I think it's similar to the US and other parts of the world in that we see this modality as a way that we can give more access to maybe students that probably won't be able to participate in 100% face-to-face higher ed education. But it does have its challenges here, especially because there's a lot more digital divide, I think, maybe from other parts in the world. We kind of saw it in the pandemic that, a lot of the programs that had to switch to remote learning and synchronous remote learning, it was really hard because there was like very poor infrastructure in other parts of the Guatemala, especially the rural areas. So I think those challenges are a bit more difficult here in Guatemala and maybe in Central America. The other thing that I found very interesting is that for Central America in particular, online learning isn't as popular and it's still in development. Like, for example, if you see like the percentage of online students in other areas in the world, it's around 20 or almost 25% of students in higher education opt for an online learning option. Here in Guatemala, only around 10 or 12% of students are in online learning programs. So it's still a very small percentage of the higher ed population that are actually in online programs. A lot more prefer face-to-face. It's changing because of the pandemic. I think it was worse prior to the pandemic because here in Latin America, there still was this perception that online learning wasn't as good quality-wise, or that the experience was less effective than face-to-face learning. So after the pandemic, what we saw here in Guatemala and Central America is that a lot of universities started thinking about their online learning strategy. And many of the universities here in Guatemala, what they consider online learning is still very similar to remote synchronous distance learning. And what we're trying to do specifically here at UVG is to make a different model of online learning, more module, more asynchronous, more flexible, thinking about those like challenges of digital divide, digital literacy. So taking into consideration the best practices that we've seen like from the US and other parts of the world that have like a longer history of online learning and trying to put that into what we want to be our online strategy to look like. The other challenge for UVG specifically is that most of our majors are focused on STEM. So how can you take some of those majors like computer science or industrial engineering and offer a possible online learning program that can reach the quality that it's expected, and the students can learn the same even if they're not like physically in the classroom. So all of that has been very interesting, and also just learning about what's happening in online learning in Central America and Latin America. It's still like a very developing modality here, and compared to other parts of the world, there's still like a lot less percentage of students that opt for online options. I think it's changing. A lot of the students now ask for more flexibility. And the other thing that we're seeing is that a lot of more students want to work and study at the same time, which is making the face-to-face programs where you expect the students to be full-time students and just be on campus the entire time a lot more difficult. So it's been a very interesting project right now that we're working on. UVG is going through a lot of transformations, and the online strategy is one of them. So I hope that by 2026, we have implemented several of the things that we're working on right now, and that online education will become a lot more popular in Guatemala and Central America, but not just because there's more like offer of online programs, because students get to see that online education can be as effective as face-to-face learning.
Yeah, and I guess maybe a question I would have is that it sounds like maybe some of those preference issues have evolved, especially since the pandemic. So maybe there's less resistance, or, I don't know, maybe some sort of a bias against online learning seems to be diminishing. But I wonder about the digital divide issues that you mentioned, because you could see where online learning might really serve somebody in a rural population who don't have access to institution of higher education nearby that they could go to face to face, sort of what they call an education desert. Like, it's just not convenient for them to go. Online learning can certainly serve an audience like that, but if there are digital divide issues, it's harder for the online learning to get to them and be effective. Is there any work being done in the country to kind of address that, or privately?
I'm very optimistic that there is, and I think it was in January that I was in Tec de Monterrey, and there was this quote that just stuck to me, because everyone that is on online learning is doing this because they want to give more access to higher education. But at the same time, you're designing programs for maybe populations that don't have the infrastructure and don't have the digital skills to learn online. So it's very funny that we think that online learning is a solution, but at the same time, there's no high-speed internet, and people usually don't use technology that much. So you're expecting to have students to learn entirely online and using a lot of digital tools, when during their whole youth, probably they'd never used a lot of the computer, or they didn't even have that when they were in the school, like primary or secondary school. So it was interesting because, you're designing this to get more access, but you have to think about the entire context. And the thing that makes me hopeful is I think it was last week that here at UBG we had the launch of the Starlink internet service. And I was like, okay, so maybe, where traditional internet providers can't go because, cabled internet, and it's just hard in some areas. Maybe these new types of disruptive internet services can reach those areas and give, high-speed internet to communities that probably never could have had that type of access. So it was a very inspiring launch of this new service. And I think for education, it was like, oh, well, let's see if this opens a new door for online learning. And I think there's a lot of concern with, reducing that digital divide, and also with everything that has to do with artificial intelligence and how, technology's changing so rapidly. If we don't do something, then we'll be so much further behind than other countries if we don't, try to get that digital divide each time less and less our problem. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. You alluded to sort of the broader digital transformation work happening at UVG now and sort of UVG Online's role in that. I wonder if you could maybe expand on that a little. What is happening at UVG and what are you trying to accomplish there?
So, there's this huge digital transformation plan going on where we see that a lot of the services that were usually only like face to face or students had to come to campus to get some services. We're offering more and more of them online to make sure that, it's not only like the distance, but also the traffic in the city. It's become a huge issue. Also, parking spaces here is a huge issue. So we're changing a lot of the core platforms here at UVG, including the student information system. We're incorporating new services fully online. We're also trying to simplify a lot of processes that sometimes made it complicated for students to have access to different programs here at UVG. So it's a very interesting time, I think, for higher education because there's a lot of new tools that are now available. And for us that are, smaller universities, now have like technologies that can help them grow and give like students better services. So between the digital transformation that's going on and all this online learning project, I think that in the couple of years, UVG is going to be a lot different from what it is right now.
Yeah, well, maybe we all will be as the internet tends to accelerate, transformation for all of us. Is there anything else you think you'd want our listeners to know about UVG or about online learning in Guatemala that maybe you haven't mentioned?
Well, I think that Latin America in general is really changing a lot in higher education. So, for example, a lot more is happening in continuing education, and programs are becoming like more modular and stackable. And this trend of, micro credentials is also catching up a lot here in Latin America. And actually our new bachelor's degrees that we're designing online, we're thinking about making them more modular and maybe stackable and adding certifications. I think all of this is also catching up in Latin America, and I'm very happy about it. In Central America specifically, I think we're now focusing more on the region, not only like in each country, but also thinking, how can we help the region with different needs that we see that we have. And another thing that's really interesting that's happening is that a lot of activities like COIL, Collaborate Online International Learning, are becoming also very popular here. And that also happens because of the pandemic. So I think we suffered a lot during the pandemic, but prior to that, we didn't have like Zoom or having these types, of synchronous online meetings were very rare. And now we have like all these new tools, and companies that made them like free during the pandemic actually gave us Latin Americans the opportunity to test them out. And the ones who, could had like a more like open economic model for our region, we were able to keep, those new platforms. So I think that even like technology providers or tech providers during the pandemic learned how to adjust to different regions of the world, and all that changed, after that. So it's a very interesting time, and I think that maybe for universities in the U.S. to just keep an eye on Latin America, and interesting collaborations could happen between universities in Latin America and the U.S. and other areas of the world.
Yeah, and with all of this digital transformation, digital tools, internet, I think it actually makes collaboration a lot easier than it would have otherwise. Angie, this has been really, really interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on Topcast today.
No, it was my pleasure, and I hope to come back again and tell you more about what's going on at UVG.
Would love that. We'll check in again soon.
Well, Tom, that was your interview with Angie Rocha.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to her. I enjoy every time I talk to her, and really impressed with some of the work that she's doing at UVG. And in fact, with their president, their rector, who we did have a chance to meet and speak with, he's a bit of a visionary, and he really wants to kind of push the institution in a digital direction, not just with online learning, but with a lot of things, because they're a STEM-oriented kind of institution, and they've got this multi-point kind of reimagining of their institution with a new strategic plan, and Angie's a part of that in the pretty broad committee that's looking at all different aspects of the university. But I was just really impressed with what they were doing, and certainly found her comments really interesting about both the educational context, but the online educational context in Guatemala today.
I was thinking, as we discussed way back in episode number 24 with our colleague Alejandra Alex Pickett, and more recently in episode 150 with our colleague Dr. Savari Wambaleka, related to the SAGE Handbook of Online Higher Education. As online education professionals, we kind of run the risk of being overly provincial if we don't attend to the experiences and insights from colleagues outside of our local or national context, literally from around the world. I'm reminded of a line that my qualitative research professor drilled into us, which is, like, in qualitative research, you make the strange familiar and the familiar strange. And I think there is something about getting outside of your immediate context to understand your field better.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's interesting to look at, what's different, but also to recognize what's the same challenges, the same, goals that we all have. A couple of interesting things that Angie talked about, some of which I learned while I was in Guatemala and wanted to highlight here, was this monopoly of a single public institution. There's only one public institution. As she said, I think there was 200,000 students in that. That's a lot. That's even bigger than UCF. It's big, more than twice as big. So that's a thing. And I don't think she said the number in our interview, but I remember from my visit, I think they told me that like 5% of the national budget goes to that institution, which is a giant number for educational support. Of the country, yeah.
Full.
I may not have, it may be 3%, but even 3%, 3 to 5, it's some single digit amount of the total country's budget goes to that institution, which is incredible support. But it also forces institutions like hers, the privates who don't receive that kind of support, to be really scrappy and to be really efficient and to kind of have their wits about them as they kind of move forward on their own agendas. So I saw that all over campus when we were there. She talked a little bit about the percentage of students who are online. I think she quoted kind of the broader, like, general number outside of Guatemala is about 25%. I'd have to go look at my Chloe report to see how that
It sounds
fits.
In the neighborhood, right? It feels
does.
about right, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on how you count that number, like one online or all online and all of that. Because I think if you just have one online, it might actually be in the 30s.
Yeah,
But she said it was closer to like
right.
10 or 12%, something like that, which I thought was interesting.
Right. No. And yet some themes that sounded kind of close to home, right? The dynamic of the online learning versus remote instruction pandemic thing, that sounds familiar. And while there might be some idiosyncrasies, her institution's emphasis on not just digital regarding learning, but digital transformation broadly related to student services and kind of learnings from the pandemic era. I mean, I thought, we all are kind of wrestling with that, I think. But then there were some other differences as well. Like, I was fascinated that free services of technology during the pandemic era, which allowed experimentation and overcoming resistance, but now like the check is coming due kind of thing. That was interesting. That was interesting, I thought.
I can say I kind of relate to some of that because we had some broad adoption of stuff based upon, certain, maybe not free, but we could pay in arrears for just what we use, kind of licenses that are gone now. And we have to kind of figure out what we really need. And then maybe the last thing I'll observe is her comment about the rural population in Guatemala. Now, the only parts I saw was Guatemala City, which was pretty urban. But they have two other campuses as part of UVG, and they're much more remote. One is sort of down on the coast, and the other is kind of up in the mountains. It used to be an old military base that's been converted to a campus. And those populations have very different needs than the folks in the city. Wi-Fi is an issue, and how do you serve those students who really could benefit from online learning because they're remote, literally remote. But if there are digital divide issues, that's a challenge. And I think it's analogous to some of the things we see across the United States as well. How do we bring education to people who are kind of on the margins like that? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, for sure. Plenty more we could talk about, but we should probably try to get this plane on the runway before it runs out of gas completely.
Sure. You want me to try to bring us in for that final landing there?
I think that would be a great idea.
So I think we're always generally better together. And that's certainly true of the connections from the Hubert Humphrey Fellows Program that lead to better understanding and how we can work together to overcome various challenges, such as educational access through digital teaching and learning, and that, bring us into contact with great new colleagues like A.G. Rocha.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. We might be pushing it, but do you think I can slide in a plug before we get out of here?
If not now, when? Do it.
If not me, who? You maybe, I mean somebody. Okay, thanks. Well, dear listener, would you please consider rating and reviewing Topcast wherever you access the podcast? This helps the algorithms, our dear friends, the algorithms, direct potential new listeners to this podcast, and that would be oh so helpful. Thank you in advance. Well, Tom, as always, good to be with you and share a virtual cup of coffee. And dear listeners, until next time, for Topcast, I'm Kelvin.
And I'm Tom.
See ya.